on post-high school, what's math got to do with it? And my name is Manny Barbera, and I am with the Silicon Valley Education Foundation. SVF has as its mission to deliver and advocate for STEM education that inspires underserved students to succeed in college and careers. We do that through our signature program. It's our Elevate Math program, which is an extended time acceleration program, as well as a very similar program in computer science. We also coordinate the Eastside Alliance, which consists of the Eastside Union High School District and the 7 elementary feeder districts that feed into Eastside, serving altogether over 80,000 students. Together, it would be like the 3rd largest school district in the state. The Eastside Alliance also provides a pathway to college through the Spartan Eastside Promise in partnership with San Jose State University. And we're also very proud this week to be a co-sponsor of College Week in partnership with the with the Santa Clara County Office of Education. So we have an interesting program planned for you today, and we're going to get started right away. But before we get started, introducing our speaker and panelists, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kayla, who has some technical information to share. Kayla?
Hello, everyone. My name's Kayla, as Manny mentioned. Before we get started, we want to get to know our audience a little bit better. So if you can please take a moment to complete the poll that should pop up on your screen right now and just answer those questions for us. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can feel free to use the chat or the Q&A on the bottom of your Zoom window on the toolbar. We're just waiting. Oh, everyone has completed the poll. Thank you.
We good?
Okay, we're good.
Kayla. And now I would like to introduce to you a good friend of the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, Neil Finkelstein. Neil is a senior researcher from West Ed who's made significant contributions to the field of education and especially to the Eastside Alliance, who is research. I think we've collaborated on like 4 or 5 different research studies within the Alliance. And he's going to provide some insights on the high school course pathway, especially on the importance of math. So Neil, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Good morning, Manny. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Silicon Valley Education Foundation for being a part of College Week. I'm thrilled to participate and to share a few insights and make a few comments that get the discussion started. I'll just take a few minutes, but what I want to do is introduce us to kind of a few big ideas that I hope will thread through the work of the next hour. I want to start by suggesting that when we talk about the sequences under which students and their families and their counselors plan the transition from high school to college, particularly as it relates to math, there's a tendency to plan forward, and I want to encourage us to plan backwards. That is, where do we think the student is going to be when they enter college, and what would the pathway have been moving backwards from the senior to the junior to the sophomore to the freshman year of their high school work that would allow them to have a smooth transition in the long run. We know an awful lot about what 4 years of math in high school means to students as they make their way to college, and it's that backward mapping that's so important. You can't help but get to backward mapping and not reiterate the importance of early fluency in math. And there's just an ever more stable and really wonderful body of research that points to the challenges that students have in some foundational areas in math learning that really do go back to primary grades math. We know an awful lot about early childhood math right now. Over the last 20 years, there have been tremendous insights into what it means to prepare students, even in their pre-K and early years of elementary school, as it relates to the ability to learn about computation, about series and sequences and patterns, and the many things that add to the cognitive development and growth of children. And those early years are just so important. We can trace issues in the way that students convert fractions to decimals into place value misunderstandings, which are related to second grade concepts. And so there's an awful lot of reliance on that early set of strong math foundations. There's a tremendous amount of research that really leads to this caution about moving students through math foundations too quickly. And there's been a lot of debate up and down the state, around the country, about when should algebra be taught. And it's a little bit unfortunate that we make these distinctions so cleanly and so carefully. We could spend the next 2 days talking about whether or not a unit on being able to manipulate the quadratic formula believes best placed for somebody who's 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. I would only offer that the new standards that have been put in place in California, the California College and Career Readiness Standards, provide rock solid foundation building through the Common Core Standards aligned instructional pathway in grade 8 and in grade 9 and onward. And the process by which those standards loop the kind of information that students need to build strong foundations and also to increase their fluency as years go by is really anchored in those well adhered to standards aligned instructional strategies. Some people have asked, well, my student won't be able to get to their favorite, most astounding college or university by the time they're a high school senior. They have aspirations to go to Holy Grail University and they can't take BC calculus or multivariable calculus. To that, I would say, map backwards. There are plenty of pathways that work for all students. There are plenty of examples of students who can reach these aspirational goals by the end of their senior year. There are lots of alternative ways to get through differences in doubling up in classes, in changing the pacing through the summertime, and that these decisions about moving students too fast should be done very, very carefully. And in general, the pathways should only move to accelerate students after they've reached high school and not in the middle school experience. The final point I'm going to make, and then I'm going to turn it over to my other panelists, is that the question of recency, that is, when did you last take math, has everything to do with how well prepared you are in the transition from high school to college. We did work many years ago that were showing that more than a third of students in California, seniors, weren't taking math. They're not required to take math as a senior, according to the A3g eligibility standards for the UC and CSU system. As you know, 3 years are recommended, 2 are required. And yet we know that students really, really suffer in their transition between high school and college if they haven't had math as a senior in high school. This pattern of recency packs all of our learning in all sorts of different ways, but we're balancing the fluency, the procedural fluency in math with those reinforcements of concepts, and they really are helped for seniors. Because we're fortunate today to have so many faculty and people who are affiliated with the California State University system, we can launch, at least in part, into the discussion about what should those quantitative reasoning requirements be. And as a matter of policy, we took it up as the California State University System Board in the summer of 2019 to ask the question, should admissions requirements be changed to look for quantitative reasoning experience during all 4 years of math? That proposal ultimately did not go forward, but I think it elevated and raised and surfaced a very important discussion on how well students are prepared, what the courses might be, the variety of new course offerings that are being developed around the state, and some really keen insights into what it means to provide the throughput and continuity of math learning in all sorts of applied areas, as well as in more traditional kinds of curriculum designs that do allow for that 4-year experience. So back where I started, my point to leave you with today is that it's the mapping backwards that matters, at least in the transition as I've seen it. Look at what that 4-year high school experience is going to be, lots of different ways to do it. Don't accelerate too quickly, and primarily keep a strong eye on those questions of procedural and conceptual fluency in math as students are being supported all the way through. So with that as a few comments, I'm very happy to join the panel today, and I'll look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Neil, thank you for those comments. And knowing your research very well, there's so much more behind what you said. But just to kind of recap, what I was hearing, the importance of backward mapping, taking a look at the importance of math in the early years, moving carefully and cautiously in terms of accelerating students. The Common Core Standards have provided a foundation in math. And then the importance of recency, I think it's the senior math, the 4 years of math matter. and it could be like another course in quantitative reasoning. So just kind of summarizing your comments with that. So we're going to get involved in a discussion. I'm going to introduce our panelists now, and who you'll be hearing from. And there's two groups. One, we're going to hear first from professors from San Jose State University, engage in a conversation, a discussion, and then we have some terrific K-12 educators who will be engaging in the discussion and reacting to what they hear as well. So at the university level, I'd like to introduce Tom Reese, who is the Academic Preparation Programs Manager, the Office of Undergraduate Education. Thank you again, Tom, for joining us on this panel. He's been on our panels before. Julie Sleva Spitzer, she's Professor in Mathematics Education at San Jose State. And from the Mathematics Department, Wes Masuszewski, he's Assistant Professor in Math at San Jose State. And at this time, before we get involved in the panel discussion, I would like to invite one of our really good partners from San Jose State University, the Dean of the Lurie College of Education. It's been a delight to be working with Heather Latimer the last few years, ever since she's joined the College of Education and taken over the leadership there, shown some great vision. So Heather, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and really delighted to be here and appreciate the work that you have done to organize the panel. I think this conversation is really important to have the opportunity to have K-12 educators, university educators, policymakers and researchers come together to talk about math alongside parents and students. We know that for too long, math has been a gatekeeper, and I really appreciate the words that Neil used, which helped us to reframe from math as a gatekeeper to math as an opportunity maker. And that's certainly something that our College of Education is committed to in terms of how we educate teachers and future educators, regardless of what role they're in this K-12 system. And it's also something that I know our colleagues in math education and the mathematics department at the university are committed to as well, and really excited to have the opportunity to hear further from Professor Spitzer and Professor Masuszewski around the work that they're doing to make sure that our students are finding math fun. I think that's one of the things that we often, when we think of math as a gatekeeper, it's because at some point, many of us had an experience that was scary in math, that it made it feel unwelcoming, and like it was something that pushed us out. But there's joy in math, and the more we can do to find opportunities for joy in mathematics, to find opportunities for fun in mathematics, the more that we can make sure that it is something that is creating opportunity rather than acting as that gatekeeper. So looking forward to further conversations, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Heather, thank you very much. And I love your comment there. Instead of being a gatekeeper, which implies sort of like keeping students out, it's an opportunity maker, that math really opens doors, and to kind of change our thinking about that. I think that's a really important comment. Might take away some of the fear behind math. So we're going to jump right into discussion. And please, this is a discussion. So we're not going to agree on everything. And I think it's a matter of making it kind of sharing information for those that are listening today, that are live, and then when we show this later on to the Eastside Alliance and other high school math teachers in the area. So the very first question I'm going to throw out is, obviously math is very important in the college high school pathway. So for the professors at San Jose State, what would you think that middle school and especially high school teachers need to know about students learning math in college, and also its role in admission? So, if you're having a conversation with middle school, high school teachers, what would you want them to know about what students need to know in college, and also how important is its role in admission? Maybe, beginning with Wes, you might want to, or Tom, dealing with the admissions issue, you may want to take that on.
I think Tom would be appropriate.
Yeah, so
you want to, yeah.
Well, good morning. Thank you all for attending, and Manny, thank you for inviting me. So when it comes to the admission process, I think that the viewers of this webinar are probably already very familiar with the A3g course sequence. And as far as math is concerned, the requirement is that students take 3 years of math, either the traditional Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 pathway, or the integrated math 1 through 3 in order to be CSU eligible. That is not necessarily our recommendation, as Neil alluded to earlier. The idea of recency is very important, and it's especially important for students who are going to be majoring in fields that involve calculus or more work in statistics. So for students who are students who know that they're going to be majoring in a field that has a quantitative component, remaining in math for the entirety of the high school career is something that we strongly recommend. Again, as Neil alluded to, it was we were looking at this as a possible admission requirement that's temporarily on hold as we see what changes occur in secondary ed as a result of the shift to Common Core and other initiatives that the CSU is part of. But it's not necessarily something that's gone for good. So I can speak to, as far as San Jose State is concerned, our College of Engineering places a great importance on students being calculus ready in their first semester. And to a lesser extent, some of the majors in the College of Science view math in the same way. They have high unit majors that students can make it through in 4 years, only if they walk a very, very narrow line. And so having calculus in high school is not necessarily important, but being ready for calculus in college is very important. So going back to Neil's idea of backward mapping, making sure that you're prepared for calculus when you arrive at the university, if you intend to study a statistics-based major, is a very, very good idea. Even though for students going into the humanities and arts, we do have a GE requirement for a year of math just to meet our breadth of study requirements at the CSU. And I can share some statistics with you about first year completion of the quantitative reasoning GE requirement. As we were talking before this webinar began, the panelists were discussing the CSU shift away from remedial math to supported instruction for students whose educational record suggests that they may need additional help when they get to the university. So we no longer put students through a review of math through Algebra 2 when they arrive at the CSU, regardless of their academic record in math. They go directly into college level classes, no matter what their secondary ed history suggests. But if their record suggests that they would benefit from assistance, they go into classes that have that assistance built in. And I'm going to leave it to the math professors to talk about what that assistance consists of. But this has proven to be a very positive shift for the CSU. And the last thing I'll share with you is our B4, our quantitative reasoning GE requirement completion rates before and after this shift away from remediation and supported instruction. And these numbers that I'm going to share are specific to San Jose State. So the fall 2017 freshman cohort was our last admitted group that was admitted under the rules of remediation. And for that group, we had a 61.1% completion rate of the quantitative reasoning GE requirement in the first year. Once we shifted over to supported instruction, the following year, our fall 2018 cohort, the completion rate in the first year jumped from 61.1% to 82%. So that was a huge gain for our first year students. And that was just our first try out of the gate for the fall 2019 cohort, which is the most recent cohort for which we have a full year of data. The completion rate jumped up to 87%. So we're very happy to see that these shifts in the way we provide student support in mathematics and quantitative reasoning at the CSU has been very successful at San Jose State. And I will leave it at that and hand the floor over to the math professors.
No, thank you for that information, Tom. Those are positive results. Wes, Julie, comments, reactions?
Should we play rock, paper, scissors to see who goes? I can.
Okay.
There you go. Okay. You want to go ahead, Wes?
Oh,
Okay.
sure. I could just carry on with where Tom left off. Actually, both Julie and I were at one point separately developmental math coordinators. And so that's actually when I started at San Jose State a few years ago. That was my first role. And I could tell, I think on day one, that it was not a good thing. I didn't see a lot of good coming of that program. And from my perspective, the way I thought about it is, well, if the students, didn't get it the first time around, the second time around, whatever the topic might have been, why should I think that what I do will make them get it? Like, what do I add to the conversation that will suddenly make it click? And I realized the answer is nothing. That's an insurmountable problem. If you're constantly trying to drive through that wall, you're just not going to make any progress. And that was my perspective on developmental math. Thankfully, the executive order came down. And we took a different approach at San Jose State, that we explicitly tried not to reteach intermediate algebra or whatever the heck we were doing before, but work at the level of dispositions towards math. And that's what we're doing now. And so what I mean by that is in Math 1, which is one of the first courses for Category 3 and 4 students that are admitted to San Jose State, it doesn't have necessarily an explicit curriculum, because I think no matter what you choose for a curriculum for that course, you're wrong. But rather, you have to think about the student more holistically and their previous experiences and where they're headed and what we can do to bring them along. And that tends to be less about curriculum and more about disposition towards math. They come into university thinking about math typically in a fairly rigid way. And that's not the fault of high school teachers or anything like this. It's just, their own personal experiences with math. They tend to experience math through formulas a lot, and don't really see beyond that necessarily always. Maybe they're exposed to that in their high school education, but from the student's perspective, that might be kind of the rigid view they come in. So the approach in Math 1 is really to have them engage with mathematics to the point of not even giving them a formula ever for anything or ever showing them how to do a problem, but just bringing it out of them. So having them engage in an authentic conversation with a situation and see how the math naturally arises. Now, I think this is very important because as soon as you can do away with that rigidity, they can see that anything you do can be solved in a multitude of ways. And if they choose to solve it one way, Julie chooses to solve it in another way. It doesn't mean she's more right than you. It just means there is this diversity of responses, okay? And being able to switch between them and having that flexible mindset, that goes way further than being hung up on, oh, should I take Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 or all of the details. You have to think about the overall disposition towards mathematics, because that's what leads to further engagement. So I think that's bore out in those numbers that Tom gave us, that the students seem to be latching on. I mean, it's still, there's no easy answers. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it really is opening up mathematics to be something to engage with. We all know we're all biased. We have survivorship bias. We all love math because we teach it. So yeah, it is the greatest subject anyone could study out there. We just have to open it up to bring our students along with it. That's what I'll say. I'll throw the ball in your court, Julie.
Thanks, Wes. Everything that's been said is so important. I can't highlight enough. I know people that are possibly listening to this are going to be students possibly next year in college. And I think the importance of recency that Neil first talked about and Tom also talked about is really, really important. I teach math ed courses, and so primarily my students are people that are going to become teachers. And one of the biggest issues that we see is this readiness for the class. And so I can't stress what they've said enough. And what Wes talked about engagement is also really important in dispositions. If you're a student coming into college next year, one of the big shifts I think occurs is that there's a difference in a lot of your courses, in that you are more responsible. As I speak to students right now, you are more responsible for learning that content. You are responsible for coming to your professor when it might be something that you don't understand yet. And it's really important to come to class, really important to get all of those questions answered, because we are ready to go with your understandings where you left off in high school. And again, the readiness, really important. And we work really hard at working in our math ed courses with having them Common Core. So they're going to be very similar, with you having to explain and engage in mathematics in the classes. And you don't have to be a star student in high school in math to be a star student in college. It really can happen. Just like Wes said, it's different. We go about things differently, and it can happen.
Should I tell them that I failed my first calculus course in university, or should I keep that to myself?
I did that too, Wes.
Oh,
Let me ask you a
and we're
follow-up
both
question on that.
faculty members in math.
Yes,
Let me ask you a follow-up question on that, Jill, because you said something there that kind of triggered. Well, let me just kind of summarize a couple of things, and then I'll get to that. So Wes, Tom, one thing that you mentioned is it seems like in terms of the readiness, the major matters, right? So if I'm a student in high school, if I want to go into engineering, for example, I definitely have to have the 4 years, be ready to go, minimally be ready to be able to handle calculus in college. And that maybe, if I'm going to humanities, you still have an expectations that from the general education required for some math. And the positive shift with eliminating some of the developmental, or what might normally be called remedial. And Wes and Julie, you just said something that's kind of interesting, that you don't have to be a star student. It can happen in college. So the two of you, if I'm sitting out there right now, if I'm a teacher right now at the high school level, and I'm going to ask our educators to respond a little bit, and I'm talking to students that may, maybe might have struggled in math, and now they're taking it a little bit more seriously. What makes it different? I mean, that's a sign of hope to say, you know what, just because you weren't a star student in high school, you definitely can be in college. What makes it different?
Well, since Wes and I both failed our first calculus class in
Hey, there
college,
you go.
we may not be.
Thank you for sharing that, by the way. Thank you.
I can tell you
seriously, that's important. Thank you for sharing that. Go ahead.
Partly why I failed. I thought it was so uninteresting. I actually, to this day, I'm going to cause a sin right now. I think there's an overemphasis on calculus. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. Yeah, it got us on the moon. Yeah, it started the Industrial Revolution and all that. But there's quite a bit more to math. And to have such a narrow focus in education is really, really unfortunate. Very, very unfortunate. It's like, the limit of all of English literature is Shakespeare. You never read anything else. You never read anything by an American author. Imagine that. That'd be doing all the humanities a disservice. And it's the same thing that's going on, I think, in math. We have a very narrow focus on calculus, and that, and the whole, partly as high school and K to 12 educators, your hands are kind of tied, because that's like the culminating experience is calculus, and it's like the crown jewel of elementary mathematics. And you can't do much about that, because it's going to create going to require huge cultural shifts to kind of put that aside and look at more contemporary things that are happening in mathematics. But what did it for me, I kind of tolerated math throughout. And I eventually thought I'd be a math teacher in high school. And so I started taking more math courses. And then when I got to my second year courses, I thought, this is the most interesting thing humans have ever created. And there's no way I can study anything else other than this. And I would have had no idea prior to those second year courses. And so those would be like topology and like, you know, contemporary looks at geometry and networks and things like this that isn't present. I don't know, I could plug a book. Sorry, I don't want to take up all the time. I could plug a book if you haven't read this yet. Pick up a copy of Francis Sue's Mathematics for Human Flourishing. So Francis is a faculty member at Harvey Mudd down in Southern California. And he wrote an absolutely beautiful book about how learning mathematics and really appreciating it makes you more human, makes you be able to understand the human nature and what it is to be human, just like studying art or music. It's indispensable. It is a part of us. It's our fabric. And you wouldn't really get that from calculus. And I think that's awful.
I like that
Well,
passion. Julie, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, just, you know, I was in a calculus for engineering majors class, you know, 35 out of 37 of us failed. That was their job. And I think, you know, going back to dispositions, you know, it was kind of like, really, this is not right. You know, I think in college, you find more of your disposition. Is this what I want to do? You know, I think the world is open when you go to college and you start all over again. You have a different slate, and you really learn that your persistence can get you places. And I agree with the calculus. The whole world does not begin and end with calculus, especially in math. You know, there's a lot of aspects of math, but, you know, and really not to let anyone get you down. I mean, clearly, Wes and I, it didn't get us down, but it shouldn't let anyone get you down with anybody telling you in mathematics that, you know, you're not doing something right.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I want to open it up to the educators so we can have a discussion with everyone. And again, just to summarize, we have Vito Chiala for the high school principal at Oberfeld, Marissa Brown, instructional coach in math, and Teresa Marquez, assistant superintendent. So for the educators, what resonated with you from the, you know, presentation and the discussion, and any implications from your own instructional program? Kind of reactions. Vito, maybe you can start out. You're a high school principal. You're dealing with it at the school level there.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. And honestly, thank you. I'm loving this conversation because it's not very often that we in high school get to talk to the people in college, and we know we're preparing our students for that. And so much of what I've heard you all talk about resonates with what we're trying to do at the high school level. This idea of we receive students as freshmen. We don't want to start with remediation. We want to open access and change mindsets about math, and help really, when I go back to my own math education, and I'm probably the only non-math person here because I know Miss Brown and Miss Marquez were both math teachers, and I wasn't, my math experience was really memorizing algorithms and not knowing why or what they applied to. And so much of what we have to do now as we open access is help students understand like the practical application of the math, like ground it in reality, ground it in context, so that there's a real world reason for them to understand. If you told students that mathematics applies to human flourishing, high school students would be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And so that's our job, is to help them see the connection between math and real life. The other thing that really resonated with me is this idea of backwards mapping. And so knowing that if a student does want to be an engineer and they do need to end up in that calculus pathway, then it is our job as high school educators to create a pathway that will get them there. The problem is 14-year-olds don't know what they want to do when they're 18. And so we have to create that pathway for every single student and allow open access to it. so that when they get there, they can decide. But I will just say at Overfeld High School, and I know throughout Eastside, we've created pathways that end up at calculus A, B, B, C, but we also have pathways that end up at statistics. And we have this wonderful course out of the CSU called the Mathematics Reasoning course, MRWC, which is a wonderful way to say, no matter where you are in your mathematical education, as a senior, you're going to take math, you're going to have recency, but it's going to be a real practical application of the math skills that you've learned. And with that, honestly, love to hear from Marissa Brown about like what's going on with teachers in that world, because they're the ones responsible for doing that work.
So, and before we hear from Marissa, just for those that are live, there's a Q&A option on in the bottom there of your screen, so, or a chat. So if you have a question or want to make a comment, you can either use the chat or the Q&A function to do that. Marissa, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Manny, and thank you all for being here and for welcoming us into your spaces today this morning. So some things that resonate with me, just in terms of, I am an instructional coach, but my background is, I was actually a sociology major and became a math teacher. So my journey into education, becoming an educator, was very different than math educators who majored in math. So I really appreciate that I had that background of knowing and understanding who I'm teaching. It was just as important to what I was going to be teaching them. And part of my instructional coaching journey with a lot of my teachers is just that, like, who are you teaching? Who is your audience? Who are your students? What are their needs? And how are you identifying those needs? What is that qualitative and quantitative data that you're collecting and analyzing that helps you recognize what those needs are? And even just the aspect of doing, simple surveys of what are students' favorite colors, sports, things like that. And then allowing that to guide what some of the ways that they're teaching the content, having ways for students to connect to the content because they're seeing and hearing their interest embedded into what they're learning. And that's that connection that I feel like a lot of students feel like they're missing. And even for some teachers, sometimes they feel disconnected to what they're teaching because they don't see themselves in what they're teaching. It's like, I just have to do this. But really, it's important for teachers to have that connection, that passion of, I'm going to teach this because I know there's a way for students to really understand how they're teaching, what they're learning is applicable to their lives. And so it's actually funny, there was a social media post that was recently going around, and it said, name a book that made you cry. And adults from ages like 28 to 68 are saying Algebra 1, geometry, Algebra 2. Textbooks, math textbooks was what made them cry. And so I was like, is that really that traumatic? Was that journey that traumatic? And people were like, yes, it was. I just didn't get it. And so what struck me about some of their other responses is that they were commending some math instructors that took the time to really hone in on what are you not connecting with and how can I help you connect? And so that was the biggest piece that made the difference for them as the instructors. And so I feel like that's the audience that we're speaking to today, is that instructors who recognize that they need to figure out how to connect with their students so that the students can then connect with the content. And I feel like our time today is providing insight and next steps for educators, which is helpful for me because that's who I'm coaching. That knowledge really is power, and knowing who we are teaching is just as important as what we're teaching. And then I like that Vito mentioned that practical application. That's the key for students to recognize how they can connect to the curriculum that they are being taught, and then also helping teachers stay connected to their students.
Thank you, Marissa. Teresa, you're now responsible. You've been a math teacher, you've been an excellent high school principal, and now you're assistant soup. So you're looking at the whole system. So you've heard a lot here today. What implications are there for, again, react to anything that you've heard, but also just from a system-wide perspective?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I think I'll start with one of the things that really resonated that then speaks to the systemic approach, given the hat that I wear, is opening up mathematics. I think think Professor West mentioned that opening up mathematics so that everybody can engage with that. And so when you think about it from a high school level and the offerings that we have for our students is really thinking, what are the various pathways that we can have for our students so that they continue to engage with math in a way that then doesn't have to become some sort of traumatic, horrific story because of either the experience that they had given whatever lack of fluency or lack of skill development that they brought with them, and then just made it worse once they got to high school because of our own systemic inabilities to really transform what happens in the classroom when you're teaching math. And so that really resonates with me because we look at our existing course sequence, which begins with integrated math 1, integrated math 2, math 3, and then kids can go in a couple of different directions. But how can we then maybe possibly open up those math courses so that, as I think Neil said, this backward map the direction of the students, that we can then see, well, what would be the best mathematical options that would still prepare them for that college readiness to go in whatever direction it is they go. So maybe adding some additional probability and statistics courses that really would focus and hone in on those areas for students that may require a different path, similar to what the CSUs are doing, right? It's no longer everybody has to make sure that you take calculus, regardless of whether you're going into this field or the other. So that really resonates with me in terms of how can we at the high school level really then open up our sequencing, our courses, where they're still rigorous to prepare students for those skills needed to find success in whatever field it is that they take, but allowing for those varying pathways so that it becomes something that doesn't have to be so traumatic. You know, as a former math teacher, well, I went into teaching math because I loved math. I was good at it. And so I think most math teachers do that. You go into teaching a course that maybe you found easy or that you have a passion for. And so high school teachers, I think in particular math teachers, fall into that world of, I was good in math, it came easy to me, so I'm gonna go and teach it. And then there's that frustration of, why aren't you getting it when I'm telling you that this is the math? And so being able to switch, you know, change that mindset from within the instructors. And, you know, really the last piece that I'll say that resonated was that importance of recency. Although for us, our graduation requirements on 2 years of math, which would take a student, let's say ideally math 1, math 2, pushing them to go beyond that minimum requirement and really pushing them to stay recent within their math skills so that, as it was mentioned by most of the panel members here, they're still connected to the skill development that comes with just even engaging and exploring the world of math. And obviously, you know, I'm biased to it because I love math. I was a math teacher, and you know, I always wondered, you know, why is it okay in society to say, you know, oh, I'm not good at math, I don't do math, but nobody would ever go around saying, I don't read, right? That's something that people feel just very like, I'm not going to share that, but everyone around us feels free to just say, I don't do math. I'm not, you know, math is not for me. But yet, you know, we don't hear it from the other end in terms of the literacy aspect of it.
Well, that's a good point, Teresa. It's like we give permission for people to say they're not good at math and then just kind of let it go. I'm going to open this question up for everyone, just because I'm sorry that, you know, I'm just looking at the time. This is just a fascinating discussion. The whole issue of, you know, we talked about acceleration and being ready and the major matters, and Vito said something, and I know where Vito is coming from on this. We collaborated on a little experiment many years ago on providing an accelerated opportunity. And Vito, if I may say, you're in a lower socioeconomic community. So we're not talking Palo Alto High School or Gunn High School here. And I know if you go to Palo Alto, Gunn High School, they're having a different conversation on, you know, I've consulted with districts on the whole issue of math placement. And, you know, a district where the discussion wasn't whether you're going to take algebra in 8th grade, but the discussion was who we're going to let to take algebra 2. That's how extreme it was in this particular district, and very contentious, I might add. And Vito said something that's really important. You don't know what you want to do when you're 14, and this is, I think this is really important. So I may be sitting here as a 14-year-old, And I may go, you know, I may be good in math. I don't really like math. I'm not going to put a lot of energy into it. But maybe when I'm a senior, suddenly I want to be an engineer or I want to go into it. How do we deal with that? And as a follow-up on that, and Teresa, I'm going to put you on the spot, but you know, we've worked with Eastside before. About 10 years ago, the Eastside Union High School District was one of the first districts to adopt the A to G requirements as a default course pattern, so that students would be expected to complete the A to G, which requires 3 years of math. Long Beach Unified has, and I spoke with them, just last year. They now have their default is 4 years of math. They put that in place. Would you ever go advocate for 4 years of math? And how would you deal with the issue, what Vito said, when students don't know what they want to do, with that issue of taking, you know, a more accelerated pathway in high school? So I'm just going to open that up to everyone, and Neil, jump in on this too, because I know this is your area of expertise. But the math professors, and how would you respond? First, 4 years of math as a default, so that would be expected that they would do it. And let me tell you what it means to me, what default means. It means I'm going to take that 4 years of math. And if you don't want me to take it, then my parents are going to have to come in and say, I don't want him to take this class. You're just going to assume I'm going to take it, rather than the other way around. And then the other part would be the whole issue of acceleration, dealing with the fact that not everyone knows what they want to do when they're 14.
Annie, maybe I could just start us off, and I really think it's a great question. I also, as I heard myself speak, I stumbled on a sentence when I was presenting, and I just want to reiterate, as Manny just said, and as Tom said, and others, that we have the A to G requirements, which are, of course, those parallel requirements in the UC and CSU system. And I just want to remind folks that while there may be districts in the state of California that require only 2 years of math, the A to G requirement is 3 years of math, and we're recommending 4 years of math. So I just want to be absolutely crystal clear, and apologize if I stumbled, that 4 years of math is where I end up. And I put a document, a resource in the chat that I hope is a 4-year math pathway mapping tool that you might find useful in multiple languages, with a guide sheet for counselors and parents. I think the issue reinforces what several of our panelists have said today, which is that it need not be that the path to calculus is any more held up as the pathway that makes sense. And you know, this is a wonderful opportunity that we're in. I mean, look at, even in this, you know, tremendously complicated time of COVID, the number of things that we can see and learn about resources for students to see, to share, to have opportunities to learn from. There are teachers who are exploring new ways of connecting with students in content. We have more experimentation and innovation going on with the kinds of ways that math can be learned and taught, and the kinds of content that can be really applicable. So the quantitative reasoning kind of work, and that wonderful work that a quantitative reasoning task force did within the CSU system 4 or 5 years ago, was to try and open our minds to the many different ways. And for students on the call today, and for parents, you know, what would it mean if you took a course in forestry forensics that was a quantitative reasoning course in your sophomore year in high school? You didn't take geometry, but you took forestry forensics, which is an applied math course that could then continue to strengthen and reinforce concepts. It could continue to keep you engaged. Then you take geometry as a junior in high school. There are so many different kinds of content. It's in applied areas in climate change. It's in applied areas in biotechnology. It's in applied areas in computer coding and algorithms and network security. It's in applied areas in all sorts of ways in which we use and see information. So this idea that we expand the high school programs and these 4-year sequences to offer, as others have said, engaging in the kind of math content as we explore content, is really, I think, the hinge issue. And never to lose the eye on the prize that it's a 4-year math program in high school, which is the smooth transition into higher education.
Tom, so what about that relative to the admissions process? You know, if I take forensics and forestry or whatever. Is that going to impact, my opportunity? Because San Jose State is not that easy to get into anymore. It's gotten a lot of accolades. I think it was what most transformative university. And there was another one that I heard recently, but the most underrated. So, for the people listening out there, is that going to impact the possibility?
First of all, I want to reiterate something that Neil just said, and that is the variety of course options. In fact, that's echoing what a lot of panelists here have said, that math doesn't have to be all calculus directed. And I say this as someone, by the way, who loved calculus. And I won't go into my own personal story other than to say that I had really good calculus teachers who brought it alive as more than just a collection of algorithms, and really taught the conceptual underpinnings of calculus so that the algorithms made sense in a larger context. But math doesn't have to be just calculus directed. And there are plenty of course options that high schools could go towards that would fulfill that fourth year math requirement that the CSU has been considering, which is why we don't really talk about this as 4 years of math. We talk about it as 4 years of math and quantitative reasoning. And that quantitative reasoning component is very important, because there are a lot of math or quantitative reasoning courses that exist outside of the math department, even at a university. So San Jose State has a course in linguistics and language development, and another course in philosophy that completes our quantitative reasoning requirement for students who are not going into STEM or stats-based majors. So this is my long way of answering the question that has a shorter answer, and that answer is yes. Students could be math ready for many majors, not obviously all majors, but for many majors, by taking math that is not fundamentally algebraic after they've completed their A through G requirements.
Okay, comments?
Or along the path of completing their A through G requirements.
Heather?
Yeah, I want to add that it's not, yes, it's about, we want to make sure that students are able to get into college, but we also want to make sure that once they get here, they're able to be successful.
To graduate, right? That's the key.
To graduate and to find their passion. And you talked about at 14, you may not know exactly what you want to do. At 17 and 18, you may not. Heck, at almost 50, I don't always know what I want to do each day. Right. And so, I think that we need to allow for some flexibility. And if students are marching their way through courses that they're not enthusiastic about, if you can, instead of doing the pre-calculus class, take the statistics class and take the coding class or the forestry management class and find something that you're passionate about, that's going to make you excited and give you a reason to learn the math. And so you can come back to that pre-calculus class and feel like, I understand how it applies and I'm excited about it. And part of that is the teaching. And obviously, we work hard to ensure that the teachers are prepared. And Julie does a tremendous amount of making sure that teachers are prepared to make that math meaningful. But it's also about the readiness of the student and how excited they are. Because as much as we say, yeah, there's going to be challenges and we're going to persevere through with you, it also has to be the determination of the student and the individual to feel like there's a purpose there. So
and Wes, I'm going to ask you to comment on that, but you said something really important. It's not just enrolling, it's about graduating. The last bit of research that I read showed that there are more students who are lower socioeconomic, and I came from that environment, enrolling in college, but they're not graduating at a higher rate. So there's a higher percentage of actually enrolling, but they're not actually getting out, to your point, Heather. And so we can't just look at can you get in, can you also get out
and get out in the fields that you want to. So we've done, higher ed generally has done a tremendous amount in the last decade to increase our graduation rates. And that's certainly true in the CSU system. There's graduation rates generally, and there's also graduation rates in STEM fields. And what we see is that there are a significant number of students who come in saying they're interested in STEM and then don't persist.
They drop out.
Fields.
Yeah, they drop out.
In part because of some of the math challenges. Sorry, go ahead, Wes.
Wes, you're going to give you the last comment here because we're running out of time because we have a question from our. Go ahead.
I'll correct you, Manny, on something you said. Heather initially did not say graduation, but succeed.
Succeed. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and I think we're really hung up on credentializing everybody, and less. We've lost focus on what we're to be doing as educators, and that's developing humans and really empowering them and things like this. And so there's such a mad rush to get through so much math and like to bog our students down with all these technical and curricular details and this and that. Then you're staring at the trees all the time and you lose sight of the forest. And it's a rich world out there. And we just have to, you know, express the richness and express our own passion for learning and this and that, and expose our students in a meaningful way to all that there is out there. And so when your initial question was, should students take a fourth year? It was answered eloquently by Neil and Tom and Heather, more eloquently than I could. My answer was going to be, yeah, of course there should be. You know, do you drink water every day? Do you do push-ups every day? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you should be doing math every day because it's an interesting thing to do that makes you more complete. But at the same time, that fourth year, if it's just more algebra or if it's just more calculus or something, man, I would hate that. Yeah. But if it was something, well, you know, I would hate it. Some people like Tom, he would nerd out over the calculus. But to express that richness and to stop with that very narrow view of mathematics, that's what our students are going to benefit from, really. That's what's going to allow them to thrive and to succeed.
So Wes, I'm going to correct you on something. I drink water every day. I don't do push-ups every day. All right. So we have a question. We have a question from one of our participants. Heather, I don't know who can respond to this, but do some colleges have a special program, or do all colleges provide the same options? And I'm going to interpret that to mean like a support program that was described earlier. Is that, Tom, I know you gave results for San Jose State. Do all, like if I went to Long Beach, East Bay, San Francisco State, same or not?
So
if you don't mind, I'll take it. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Heather. Well, the reason I was going to offer to answer this question is that this is what I do at San Jose State, although I'm really happy to have anyone answer because I think all San Jose State folks would give the same answer. And the answer is that we are all operating under the same mandate, the same executive order from the Chancellor's Office that requires us to replace remediation with supported instruction. But there are 23 campuses and each one has developed its own approach to meeting that goal. So at San Jose State, we have mainly focused on developing co-requisite support courses that go with parent courses so that students who need extra help can in a co-requisite course for an additional unit and get the help they need to stay current on the material. There are also stretch options, which are less common at San Jose State, but they're the options that other campuses have made their main approach, which is taking a one semester course and spreading it out over 2 semesters. The learning outcomes are the same, the content is the same, but it's taught at a slower pace to give students who need a little extra time to absorb the material that time that they need. So there are lots of different approaches, and San Jose State, by the way, has also done what other campuses have not done. We've developed a wealth of new courses to address the challenges of EO 1110. Wes brought up one of them, one of the ones that he was the course developer for, which is Math 1. But San Jose State has developed a number of other courses that are also intended to address EO 1110. And if anyone's interested in them, you can contact me separately. I'll be happy to share those courses with you. So the short answer is the different campuses are addressing our common mandate in different ways.
So thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I've absolutely loved this discussion, and we can just go on in this. And I'm hoping that we can repeat this. So first of all, somebody had asked online if we're going to we are recording this and we will make this available. But we also, honestly, I'd like to have this same conversation with a live studio audience of the teachers in Eastside so they can actually interact with San Jose State instructors. Thank you so much. This has been really enlightening. Kayla has put out a request in the chat to fill out the survey and to give us some feedback. Again, this is one of the culminating activities as part of College Week. And thank you everyone who participated live and attended, and also for all our panelists. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon at some point. So Kayla, any final comments?
Yes, we have a poll as well as a survey. I put the survey in the chat, but I'm going to launch the exiting poll right now. So if you all can take a minute to complete that poll before you go. Okay, everyone has completed the poll. Thank you all so much.
Okay, are we all done? Thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you out there in the real world. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you.